Shana Tova, and welcome to everybody here. Thank you for being here in person, and thank you for being with us, those of you who are online. We are thrilled to have everyone here. And when we say everyone at the city congregation, we mean everyone, regardless of your individual or particular religious backgrounds or faiths. We are so happy to have you here to join with us this evening in our Kol Nidre service at the City Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. My name is David Klein. I am the president of the City Congregation and also one of your song leaders today. I will be leading you in song along with my wife, Jennifer, and we are accompanied this evening by Kevin David Thomas. Thank you, Kevin. Our services are participatory, which means that for most of the songs this evening, we'd like you to join along, and you'll see me asking you to join along from here at the podium. I do have a couple of announcements before we get started. Number one, the restrooms are through the doors on the side, and they are down to the right in that hallway. The services tonight, everyone, please keep your masks on. We, up here, who will be speaking, will remove our masks to deliver the service. There is a microphone placed in front of the platform here, and that is for anybody who is going to participate in the readings, who has been asked to read this evening. Please come to this microphone, and just prior to your reading, you could come and sit in the chairs just to my right, your left, over here. And other than that, I am going to now introduce Rabbi Tzemah Yoreh.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to those who are listening virtually. Welcome to everyone here. It is still so exciting for me to lead this service in person, just the second service since March of 2020 that I'm leading in person of this nature, and I'm just so thrilled. So the way this is going to work, I'm giving my talk right now, then we'll have a service, and then there's going to be a section of literary readings towards the middle of the service, and I'll announce that when we'll get to it. So every year at the high holidays we have a theme that we dedicate, and this year the theme is rebuilding, and specifically my theme is rebuilding compassion. On Rosh Hashanah, I talked about how we can rebuild our depleted reservoirs of compassion through unexpected acts of deliberate kindness, even very small ones. This evening, I want to talk about something a lot harder, making peace. I'm not talking about peace in the Middle East or in Afghanistan or between QAnon supporters and Antifa or supporters of the New York Yankees and the Mets, although these are all worthy goals, some more worthy than others. I'm talking about peace among ourselves on the personal level in our own community. So my spouse and I often engage in petty spats about time allocation and communication. This, I am sure, is a fairly normal thing in modern marriages. My neural wiring makes it difficult for me to be scheduleless and do things on the fly. I will get a headache, my blood pressure will go up. When my spouse is even 5 minutes late for dinner or takes longer in a meeting or on the phone, I will be unhappy. I try really hard not to lash out, but sometimes I can't help myself and we argue. Unfortunately, this situation recurs rather frequently. My spouse is part of a senior management at a Jewish nonprofit. She's juggling 10 things, and she's always beyond busy. So this is quite petty, you might say, and you'd be right, it's petty. But it is also very basic to who I am. Adjustment and transition are so much harder for people on the autism spectrum. I am married to a lovely, empathetic, neurotypical person, but in a most fundamental way, she doesn't get it. She can't get it. And so we will argue. Despite both of us knowing all of this, I know she's empathetic. She knows that my rigidity and patterns and timing is part of who I am. There are similar divides in our congregation, divides along gender identity and sexual orientation, divides between younger and older people, between Zionists and post-Zionists, between progressives and moderates, Some of these can make for healthy differences in a pluralistic setting, while others can be hurtful. Over the past year and a half, those divides have become more visible for completely obvious reasons. The longer the pandemic runs and the longer the preponderance of our social interactions is virtual, the more we get used to othering people who we see in boxes and in chats, and the less real they become to us. What this means is that we feel freer to act out angrily, to say things that we would not say were we face to face. But there's also a gloriously wonderful flip side to this troubling dynamic. Let's focus on one word here, free. We are also free, so much freer, to say kind things to people in these very circumscribed interactions. I can tell you that this is liberating to someone like me who is by nature shy. I can say nice things to people that would be harder to say to their face. And I've witnessed this too. People who are normally reticent, they congratulate people for a new job or just on the niceness of the Zoom decor. And that's wonderful. Those kinds of interactions are wonderful. But what can we do about hurtful speech? We can use some of that freedom of the virtual world, that time before a response is expected, that disconnect in reality, to offer a measured response instead of an angry one. Or we can let it go. It is easier to let go on Zoom. Instead of calling someone on a hurtful or obtuse remark, we can simply let it go. In a heartwarming conversation with a TCC member, we talked about how they let go of hurtful comments directed at them at a TCC event, and how they thoughtfully tried to engage those they disagreed with. I found that really, really inspiring. In my own recent interactions with my spouse, I have come to accept that she can't get where I am coming from. And in the past year, we have discovered how liberating it is to set conflicts aside. Sometimes, at a certain point in an argument, I will acknowledge the difference and stop trying to win the argument. This is so difficult, but within a few minutes, my headache will disappear and I will feel so much better about the world. This seems so obvious, you may say. Why are you telling us? I'm talking about this now because despite how obvious this seems, it is actually vanishingly rare in my experience. We are creatures of the moment, especially during intense interactions, and to change course requires an act of will that society does not always encourage. In our individualistic times, release of emotion, not keeping things bottled up, is often preferred, and being passive-aggressive is viewed negatively. But I believe it is a most worthwhile act of will. Being virtual so much of the time affords that extra window to contemplate and be careful in what we say, to take a deep breath. That is one of the most underappreciated silver linings of our Zoomy lives. Control over one's tongue and emotions is one of the most prominent motifs in Jewish wisdom literature. There are countless adages extolling controlled speech. Here, I'm going to give you some. The lips of fools bring them strife, and their mouths invite a beating. The mouths of fools are their undoing, and their lips are a snare to their very lives. A man has joy in making an apt answer, and a word spoken at the right moment, how good it is. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. He who covers and forgives an offense seeks love, but he who repeats or harps on a matter separates even close friends. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. The ancient Greeks thought the same. Control over what you say is seen as foundational in Stoic philosophy. But even beforehand, Xenophon, the student of Socrates, asserted that enkrateia, or self-control, was not a virtue in and of itself, but the foundation of all virtues. If the ancient Greeks and the ancient Hebrews agreed on something, it's probably worth considering quite carefully. And so, I ask that a new commitment we may consider taking upon ourselves this Yom Kippur is to pause for a moment and exert self-control in difficult situations. Take a deep breath and say nothing. Take a deep breath and wish your friend Shana Tova. Shana Tova. Okay. Each year we begin with a clean, bright, new moment. By the time the year ends, threads of memory and desire have wrapped around us and trapped us in their complex webs. What we began with is long lost as our year ends. The sparks of that first bursting moment of light have been scattered throughout the moments of our lives.
חשבון הנפש. How shall we know what is right? Searching within, seeking to understand. חשבון הנפש. What is our task? How can we bridge the gap of thought and deed? How can we succeed? Finding a way, building a better world. This is our quest. חשבון הנפש.
United with Jews the world over, we gather to reflect together. The many branches of this menorah represent the many ways to be Jewish. May it be a year of hope and not of despair. May it be a year of vision and not of darkness. May it be a year of life and not of death. Let the fire we kindle be for us a warming flame whose brightness shows us the path of life. May the dancing flames of these candles kindle warmth within our hearts, wisdom in our minds, and passion in our lives. As these candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us.
Their brightness reminds us of our ancestors who have brought their light into our lives.
Without hope, even the day is like night.
But with hope, even the darkness becomes light.
נאה האור בעולם,
How wonderful is the light within the world.
נאה האור באדם,
How wonderful is the light within each person.
נאה האור ביום טוב.
How wonderful is the light of the holiday.
One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save.
Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength
Yom Kippur is a day of many moods, of sorrow and sadness, of anxiety and guilt, contemplation and pensiveness, of memory and loss. And also, it is a day of hope and the happiness of a life renewed. According to the Bible, Yom Kippur is a day of affliction, as it says, "You shall afflict yourself and shall do no work, for on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you." Affliction, we are led to believe, acts as a purging agent, but what this entails is not specifically defined. Fasting seems to have been the affliction of choice of the psalmist, but this was not without controversy. The prophet Isaiah challenged people whose fast was insincere and who posed as humble and self-righteous. He taught that acts of self-abnegation were no substitute for deeds on behalf of others. "Is not this the fast I choose," he exclaimed, "to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh?" Of course, the voice of a prophet is often a lonely one, and Isaiah's plaintive cry has been largely ignored. To this day, we are, as a society, still insufficiently caring for the homeless and the hungry. The practice of fasting is also no longer universally observed. While many Jews still find meaning in this ritual, many others do not and no longer keep it. For humanistic Jews, the question of whether or not to fast is a matter of choice, not commandment. Many see the practice of fasting as an archaic ritual that brings unnecessary discomfort. They also do not feel that it is necessary to voluntarily deprive themselves of food for one day in order to be more compassionate towards those who suffer hunger daily. For them, it is not our fasting that is required, but our feeling of others. It is not the humbling of ourselves that is needed, but the helping of those who find themselves humbled. Others among us also affirm these lessons and continue to fast. Some believe that when we control our appetites on Yom Kippur, we remember that on other days, too, we can be masters, not slaves of our desires. They do not regard fasting as a form of self-affliction, but as an annual opportunity to focus on reflection and atonement. For them, fasting enhances introspection and contemplation without the distractions of worldly indulgences. Others simply want to link themselves to tradition and family ties. They believe that fasting is a way to make a connection to their heritage. Each one of us will choose our own way and our own explanation. There are no right or wrong answers. There are only possibilities and choices. Whichever path we follow, let us be grateful for the freedom to ponder these decisions and the luxury of having ample food and drink that we can and may choose to forego.
Sing with me.
Asharenu, Maltov Kalkenu, Umanayim Goraleinu. Asharenu, Maltov Kalkenu, Umayafe Rushatenu. Asharenu, Maltov Kalkenu, Umanayim Goraleinu. Asharenu, Maltov Kalkenu, Umayafe Yerushatenu.
We are, every single one of us, all forgiven for all we did, what we said we'd do and didn't, for imperfect lives we lead each day, anxiety and pettiness, for not understanding, for judging and judging. To be human is to forgive. To be human is to break promises, to forget, and then to start all over again.
Page 69. Kol Nidre, a declaration that holds us in its grip. For hundreds of years, dating at least to the 8th century, the Yom Kippur service has begun with the chanting of Kol Nidre, which is not a prayer, but a legal formula that released Jews from their vows. At first, the text canceled vows that we had made since last Yom Kippur and were unable to fulfill in the year gone by. Later, the text was rewritten to nullify vows that we will be unable to fulfill in the year that lies ahead. One popular explanation for this change, which scholars consider incorrect, is that the rabbis devised it for the coming of the Crusades, in order to counteract coerced vows of conversion when Jews were forced to renounce their Judaism publicly. During the Spanish Inquisition, many Jews disavowed their faith, yet they persisted in preserving their heritage secretly. The rabbis, in effect, offered a way to make a vow without really meaning it, like keeping your fingers crossed behind your back when making a promise. Not surprisingly, many people have had a problem with this text and the loophole it offers. A 9th century sage called it a foolish custom. Anti-Semites seized on the notion that the oath of a Jew is worthless. In response, apologist rabbis scurried to defend the integrity of Jews and said that Kol Nidre was not meant to apply oaths made before courts of law, but only before God. Modern Jews have denounced this passage altogether. Nonetheless, Kol Nidre survives, even among secular Jews whose efforts to expunge it from their service are often overruled by popular appeal.
The words of this ancient invocation, still recited in its original Aramaic, are barely understood, their precise meaning unclear even to modern scholars. The origins of the prayer and its purpose remain a mystery, yet its haunting melody and the atmosphere of expectation, hope, and release that it brings cannot be denied. As we listen to Kol Nidre, let its sound reach to the center of our being. Let its melody sink to the depth of our souls. In listening to the Kol Nidre melody, we experience in our innermost hearts the torment of our disappointments and losses, our broken vows and resolutions. It is a reminder of the distance between what we are and what we wish to be. In order to change the world, we must understand the limits of the world. In order to change ourselves, we must know our own limits.
We are here again this Yom Kippur. The ancient prayer of Kol Nidre at the heart of Yom Kippur is also at the heart of our humanism. It is not about punishment for vows broken, but about our fallible humanity.
We are here again to link ourselves to our ancestors, generation to generation, who hearkened to this melody before us.
It says, we are here again this Yom Kippur to renew our vows, that humanly we may come to break. It says,
we are here again this Yom Kippur to make vows once again, despite the fact that we are fallible and can't live up to them.
It says, we are here again this Yom Kippur to declare our rights to be Jews and to honor the memory of those who died for the right to say these words.
It says, we are here again this Yom Kippur. We rejoice in our heritage and our humanity, which we have preserved our people, sustained us in life, and brought us forward to this day and this evening of Kol Nidre.
וחרמי וחונמי וחינויי וחינוסי ושבוע זה עד יום כיפורים הבא.
How divine is forgiving. We forgive those we firmly love because anger hurts, a coal that burns and smolders, still scorching the tissues inside, blistering wherever it touches, so that we bury the hot clinkers in a mound of caring, suffocate the sparks with promises, drown them in tears, reconciling. We forgive mostly not from strength, but through imperfections, for memory wears transparent as a glass with the pattern washed off, till we stare past what injured us. We forgive because we too have done the same to others, easy as a mudslide, or because anger is a fire that must be fed, and we are too tired to rise and haul a log.
Let us challenge bad habits and restrain destructive tendencies.
Let us be people of decency.
Let us express honest feelings and affirm positive beliefs.
Let us be people of integrity.
Let us reject ancient demons and renounce made-up excuses.
Let us take responsibility for our own lives.
Let us face difficult challenges and confront trying times.
Let us be people of resolve.
Let us oppose indifference and overcome inertia.
Let us take action.
Let us seek out fair solutions and champion just decisions.
Let us be people of purpose.
Let us annul false promises and repudiate empty pledges.
Let us be true to our word.
Loving life. Loving life in its mysterious source with all our heart and all our spirit, all our senses and strength, we take upon ourselves and into ourselves these promises: to care for the earth and those who live upon it, to pursue justice and peace, to love kindness and compassion.
We rise up each morning, and the earth rises too. World weary, we rise up, and we want something new. A world where compassion falls freely as rain. A world where all peace soul can live without pain, inclusive of all and rejecting of none, where love touches all lives like the warmth of the sun. No abuse and no hatred, no prisons of fear, as the cry of the shofar celebrates the new year. If we open our hearts to the love waiting there, we can have the power to heal our despair. If we open our eyes and see that all people are king, destruction will end and a new world begin. If we open our minds, a world without sorrow, a world without pain, a world where compassion falls freely as rain, a world where all people are united as one. If we open our hearts, if we open our minds, if we open our arms.
So it's a wonderful TCC tradition, every Kol Nidre, to pick literary passages to read out loud. And this year, I chose to read from the works of Oliver Sacks, who many of you probably know. So Oliver Sacks is an author, a humanist, and really in the truest sense of the word, and a neurologist by profession. In his books, he describes with such warmth the marvelous and unique human capacity to adapt. Oliver Sacks died a few years ago, and I felt that this was a moment to read his work, infused in hope. It was just infused in hope till the very day he died. And this reminds us that we can find a way through these challenges too. His work is such a reminder of this. So reading for us will be Max Zener, our maestro of oratory. Thank you.
I'm writing this with my left hand, although I am strongly right-handed. I had surgery to my right shoulder a month ago, and I'm not permitted, not capable of use of my right arm at this time. I write slowly, awkwardly, but more easily, more naturally with each passing day. I am adapting, learning all the while, not merely this left-handed writing, but a dozen other left-handed skills as well. I have also become very adept, prehensile with my toes to compensate for having one arm in a sling. I was quite off balance for a few days when the arm was first immobilized, but now I walk differently. I have discovered a new balance. I am developing different patterns, different habits, a different identity, one might say, at least in this particular sphere. There must be changes going on with some of the programs and circuits in my brain, altering synaptic weights and connectivities and signals, though our methods of brain imaging are still too crude to show these. Though some of my adaptations are deliberate, planned, and some are learned through trial and error. In the first week, I injured every finger on my left hand. Most have occurred by themselves, unconsciously, by reprogrammings and adaptations of which I know nothing, any more than I know or can know how I normally walk. Next month, if all goes well, I can start to readapt again, to regain full and natural use of the right arm, to reincorporate it back into my body image, myself, to become a dextral human being once again. But recovery in such circumstances is by no means automatic, a simple process like tissue healing. It will involve a whole nexus of muscular and postural readjustments, a whole sequence of new procedures and their synthesis, learning, finding a new path to recovery. My surgeon, an understanding man who's had the same operation himself, said, "There are general guidelines, restrictions, recommendations, but all the particulars you will have to find out for yourself." Jay, my physiotherapist, expressed himself similarly. Adaptation follows a different path in each person. The nervous system creates its own paths. You're the neurologist. You must see this all the time. Nature's imagination, as Freeman Dyson likes to say, is richer than ours. And he speaks marvelingly of this richness in the physical and biological worlds, the endless diversity of physical forms and forms of life. For me, as a physician, nature's richness is to be studied in the phenomena of health and disease, in the endless forms of individual adaptation by which human organisms, people, adapt and reconstruct themselves, faced with the challenges and vicissitudes of life. Defects, disorders, diseases, in this sense, can play a paradoxical role by bringing out latent powers, developments, evolutions, forms of life that might never be seen or even be imaginable in their absence. It is the paradox of disease, in this sense, its creative potential, that forms the central theme of this book. Thus, while one may be horrified by the ravages of developmental disorder or disease, one may sometimes see them as creative too. For if they destroy particular paths, particular ways of doing things, they may force the nervous system into making other paths and ways, force on it an unexpected growth and evolution. This other side of development or disease is something I see potentially in almost every patient, and it is this here which I am especially concerned to describe. Similar considerations were brought up by A.R. Luria, who, more than any other neurologist in his lifetime, studied the long-term survival of patients who had cerebral tumors or had suffered brain injuries or strokes, and the ways, the adaptations they used to survive. He also studied deaf and blind children as a very young man with his mentor, L.S. Vygotsky. Vygotsky stressed the intactness rather than the deficits of such children. A handicapped child represents a qualitatively different, unique type of development. If a blind or deaf child achieves the same level of development as a normal child, then the child with a defect achieves this in another way, by another course, by other means. And for the pedagogue, it is particularly important to know the uniqueness of the course along which he must lead the child. This uniqueness transforms the minus of the handicap into the plus of compensation. That such radical adaptations could occur demanded, Luria thought, a new view of the brain, a sense of it not as programmed and static, but rather as dynamic and active, a supremely efficient adaptive system geared for evolution and change, ceaselessly adapting to the needs of the organism, its needs above all to construct a coherent self and world, whatever defects or disorders of brain function befell it. That the brain is minutely differentiated is clear. There are hundreds of tiny areas crucial for every aspect of perception and behavior, from the perception of color and of motion to perhaps the intellectual orientation of the individual. The miracle is how they all cooperate, are integrated together in the creation of a self. This sense of the brain's remarkable plasticity, its capacity for the most striking adaptations, not least in the special and often desperate circumstances of neural or sensory mishap, has come to dominate my own perception of my patients and their lives. So much so, indeed, that I am sometimes moved to wonder whether it may not be necessary to redefine the very concepts of health and disease, to see these in terms of the ability of the organism to create a new organization and order, one that fits its special altered disposition and needs, rather than in the terms of a rigidly defined norm. Sickness implies a contraction of life, but such contractions do not have to occur. Nearly all of my patients, or so it seems to me, whatever their problems, reach out to life. And not only despite their conditions, but often because of them, and even with their aid. From an anthropologist on Mars. I had just returned from a few days with Stephen Wiltshire in July. I had driven up to Massachusetts to visit another autistic artist, Jessie Park, and had seen her intensely colored, star-studded drawings, very different from Stephen's, and something of her labyrinthine magic world of correlations between numbers, colors, morality, the weather. I had paid flying visits to several schools for autistic children. I had spent an extraordinary week at a camp for autistic children, Camp Winston in Ontario. The more so as one of the counselors there this summer was a friend of mine, Shane, with Tourette's syndrome, who, with his lungings and touchings, reachings and buttings, his enormous vitality and impulsiveness, seemed able to get through to the most deeply autistic children in a way the rest of us were unable to do. Turning west, I had visited an entire autistic family in California. Both parents, highly gifted, and their 2 children, all of them given, between the serious business of life, to jumping on trampolines, flapping their hands, and screaming. And now, finally, I was on my way to Fort Collins in Colorado to see Temple Grandin, one of the most remarkable autistic people of all. In spite of her autism, she holds a PhD in animal science, teaches at Colorado State University, and runs her own business. While autism was described almost simultaneously by Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger in the 1940s, Kanner seemed to see it as an unmitigated disaster, where Asperger felt it might have certain positive or compensating features, a particular originality of thought and experience which may well lead to exceptional achievements in later life. It is clear even in these first accounts that there is a wide range of phenomena and symptoms in autism, and many more can be added to those that Kanner and Asperger listed. A majority of Kanner-type children are retarded, often severely. A significant proportion have seizures and may have soft neurological signs and symptoms. A whole range of repetitive or automatic movements, such as spasms, tics, rocking, spinning, finger play, or flapping of the hands. Problems of coordination and balance. Peculiar difficulties sometimes in initiating movements akin to what is seen in Parkinsonism. There may also be very prominently a large range of abnormal and often paradoxical sensory responses, with some sensations being heightened and even intolerable, others which may include pain perception being diminished or apparently absent. There may be, if language develops, odd and complex language disorders, a tendency to verbosity, empty chatter, cliché-ridden and formulaic speech. The psychologist Doris Allen describes this aspect of their autism as a semantic pragmatic deficit. In contrast, Asperger-type children are often of normal and sometimes very superior intelligence, and generally have fewer neurological problems. We talked of many things on the way back to Fort Collins. Temple mentioned an autistic composer she knew. He would take bits and pieces of music he had heard and rearrange them. And I spoke of Stephen Wiltshire, the autistic artist. We wondered about autistic novelists, poets, scientists, philosophers. Hermelin, who has studied low-functioning autistic savants for many years, feels that though they may have enormous talents, they are so lacking in subjectivity and inwardness that major artistic creativity is beyond them. Christopher Gilberg, one of the finest clinical observers of autism, feels that autistic people of the Asperger type, in contrast, may be capable of major creativity, and wonders whether indeed Bartók and Wittgenstein may have been autistic. Many autistic people now like to think of Einstein as one of themselves. Temple had spoken earlier of being mischievous or naughty, saying she enjoyed this at times, and she had been pleased in having smuggled me successfully into the slaughterhouse. She likes to commit small infractions on occasion. I sometimes walk 2 feet outside the line at the airport, a little act of defiance. But all this is totally different category from real badness. That could have terrifying, instantly lethal consequences. I have a feeling that if I do anything really bad, God will punish me. The steering linkage will go out on the way to the airport, she said, as we were driving back. I was startled by the association of divine retribution with a broken steering linkage. I'd never thought about how an autistic person with a wholly causal view or scientific view of the universe and a deficient sense of agency or intention might formulate such matters as divine judgment or will. Temple is an intensely moral creature. She has a passionate sense of right and wrong, for example, in regard to the treatment of animals. And law, for her, is clearly not just the law of the land, but in some far deeper sense, a divine or cosmic law, whose violation can have disastrous effects, seeming breakdowns in the course of nature itself. You've read about action at a distance, or quantum theory, she said. I've always had the feeling that when I go to a meat plant, I must be very careful, because God's watching. Quantum theory will get me. Temple started to become excited. I want to get this out before you get to the airport, she said, with a sort of urgency. She had been brought up an Episcopalian, she told me, but had rather early given up orthodox belief in any personal deity or intention, in favor of a more scientific notion of God. I believe there is some ultimate ordering for good, force for good in the universe, but not a personal thing, not Buddha or Jesus, maybe something like order out of disorder. I like to hope that even if there's no personal afterlife, some energy impression is left in the universe. Most people can pass on genes. I can pass on thoughts, or what I write. This is what I get very upset at. Temple, who was driving, suddenly faltered and wept. I've read that libraries are where immortality lies. I don't want my thoughts to die with me. I want to have done something. I'm not interested in power or piles of money. I want to leave something behind. I want to make a positive contribution, know that my life has meaning. Right now I'm talking about things at the very core of my existence. I was stunned. As I stepped out of the car to say goodbye, I said, "I'm going to hug you. I hope you don't mind." And I hugged her. And I think she hugged me back. Tourette's syndrome is seen in every race, every culture, every stratum of society. It can be recognized at a glance once one is attuned to it, and cases of barking and twitching, of grimacing, of strange gesturing, of involuntary cursing and blaspheming were recorded by Aretaeus of Cappadocia almost 2,000 years ago. Yet it was not clinically delineated until 1885, when Georges Gilles de la Tourette, a young French neurologist, a pupil of Charcot's and a friend of Freud's, put together these historical accounts with observations of some of his own patients. The syndrome, as he described it, was characterized above all by convulsive tics, by involuntary mimicry or repetition of others' words or actions, echolalia or echopraxia, and by the involuntary or compulsive utterances of curses and obscenities, coprolalia. Yet in the years after its delineation, Tourette's tended to be seen not as an organic, but as a moral disease, an expression of mischievous or weakness of the will, to be treated by rectifying the will. From the 1920s to the 1960s, it tended to be seen as a psychiatric disease, to be treated by psychoanalysis or psychotherapy. But this, on the whole, proved ineffective too. Then, with the demonstration in the early 1960s that the drug Haloperidol could dramatically suppress its symptoms, Tourette's was regarded in a sudden reversal as a chemical disease, the result of an imbalance of a neurotransmitter dopamine in the brain. But all these views are partial and reductive and fail to do justice to the full complexity of Tourette's. Neither a biological, nor a psychological, nor a moral social viewpoint is adequate. We must see Tourette's not only simultaneously from all three perspectives, but from an inner perspective, an existential perspective, that of the affected person himself. Inner and outer narratives, here as everywhere, must fuse. Many professions, one would think, would be closed to someone with elaborate tics and compulsions or strange antic behaviors, but this does not seem to be the case. Tourette's affects perhaps one person in 1,000, and we find people with Tourette's, sometimes the most severe Tourette's, in virtually every walk of life. There are Tourettic writers, mathematicians, musicians, actors, disc jockeys, construction workers, social workers, mechanics, athletes. Some things, one might think, would be completely out of the question. Above all, perhaps, the intricate, precise, and steady works of a surgeon. This would have been my own belief not so long ago. But now, improbably, I know 5 surgeons with Tourette's. I first met Dr. Carl Bennett at a scientific conference on Tourette's in Boston. His appearance was unexceptionable. He was 50-ish, of middle size, with a brownish beard and mustache containing a hint of gray, and was dressed soberly in a dark suit, until he suddenly lunged, or reached for the ground, or jumped, or jerked. I was struck both by his bizarre tics and his dignity and calm. Driving back from the ranch was a stimulating, at times terrifying experience. Now that Bennett was getting to know me, he felt at liberty to let himself and his Tourette's go. The steering wheel was abandoned for seconds at a time, or so it seemed to me in my alarm, while he tapped on the windshield to a litany of hooty-hoo and hi there and hideous. He rearranged his glasses, centered them in 100 different ways, and with bent fingers continuously smoothed and evened his mustache while gazing in the rearview mirror rather than at the road. His need to center the steering wheel in relation to his knees also grew almost frenetic. He had to constantly balance it, to jerk it to and fro, causing the car to zigzag erratically down the road. "Don't worry," he said when he saw my anxiety. "I know this road. I could see from way back that nothing was coming. I've never had an accident driving. The impulse to look and to be looked at is very striking with Bennett. And indeed, as soon as we got back to the house, he seized his son Mark and planted himself in front of him, smoothing his mustache furiously and saying, "Look at me! Look at me!" Mark, arrested, stayed where he was, but his eyes wandered to and fro. Now Bennett seized Mark's head, held it rigidly toward him, hissing, "Look, look at me!" And Mark became totally still, transfixed, as if hypnotized. I found this scene disquieting. Other scenes with the family I had found rather moving. Bennett dabbing at Helen's hair symmetrically with outstretched fingers, going, "Whoo, whoo," softly. She was placid, accepting. It was a touching scene, both tender and absurd. "I love him as he is," Helen said. "I wouldn't want him any other way." Bennett feels the same way. "Funny disease. I don't think of it as a disease, but as just me. I say the word disease, but it doesn't seem to be the appropriate word." It is difficult for Bennett, and is often difficult for Touretters, to see their Tourette's as something external to themselves, because many of its tics and urges may be felt as intentional, as an integral part of the self, the personality, the will. It is quite different by contrast with something like Parkinsonism or chorea. These have no quality of selfness or intentionality and are always felt as diseases, as outside the self. Compulsions and tics occupy an intermediate position, seeming sometimes to be an expression of one's personal will, and sometimes as a coercion of it by another alien will. These ambiguities are often expressed in the terms people use. Thus, the separateness of it and I is sometimes expressed by jocular personifications of the Tourette's. One Touretteer I know calls his Tourette's Toby, another Mr. T. By contrast, a Tourettic possession of the self was vividly expressed by one young man in Utah who wrote to me that he had a Tourettized soul. Though Bennett is quite prepared, even eager, to think of Tourette's in neurochemical or neurophysiological terms, he thinks in terms of chemical abnormalities, of circuits turning on and off, and of primitive, normally inhibited behaviors being released. He also feels it as something that has come to be part of himself. For this reason, among others, he has found that he cannot tolerate haloperidol and other similar drugs. They reduce his Tourette's, assuredly, but they reduce him as well, so that he no longer feels fully himself. "The side effects of haloperidol were dreadful," he said. "I was intensely restless. I couldn't stand still, my body twisted. I shuffled like a Parkinsonian. It was a huge relief to get off it. On the other hand, Prozac has been a godsend for the obsessions, the rages, though it doesn't touch the tics." And finally, an excerpt from his final collection of essays, Everything in Its Place. As one's death grows near, one may take comfort in the feeling that life will go on, if not for oneself, then for one's children, or for what one has created. Here, at least, one can invest hope, though there may be no hope for oneself physically, and for those of us who are not believers, no sense in any spiritual survival after bodily death. But it may not be enough to create, to contribute, to have influenced others, if one feels, as I do now, that the very culture in which one was nourished and to which one had given one's best in return is itself threatened. Though I am supported and stimulated by my friends, by readers around the world, by memories of my life, and by the joy that writing gives me, I have, as many of us must have, deep fears about the well-being and even survival of our world. Such fears have been expressed at the highest intellectual and moral levels. Martin Rees, Astronomer Royal and former president of the Royal Society, is not a man given to apocalyptic thinking, but in 2003 he published a book called Our Final Hour, subtitled A Scientist's Warning: How Terror, Error, and Environmental Disaster Threaten Humankind's Future in This Century. More recently, Pope Francis published his remarkable encyclical Laudato Si, a deep consideration not only of human-induced climate change and widespread ecological disaster, but of the desperate state of the poor and the growing threats of consumerism and the misuse of technology. Traditional wars have now been joined by genocide, extremism, and terrorism, and in some cases by the deliberate destruction of our human heritage, of history and culture itself. These threats, of course, concern me, but at a distance. I worry more about the subtle, pervasive draining out of meaning, of intimate contact from our society and culture. When I was 18, I, for the first time, read Hume. I was horrified by the vision he expressed in his 1738 Treatise of Human Nature, in which he wrote that mankind is nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. As a neurologist, I have seen many patients rendered amnesic by the destruction of the memory systems in their brains, and I cannot help feeling that these people, having lost any sense of a past or a future, and caught in a flutter of ephemeral, ever-changing sensations, have in some way been reduced from human beings to Humean ones. I have only to venture into the streets of my own neighborhood, the West Village, to see such Humean casualties by the thousand. Younger people, for the most part, who have grown up in our social media era, have no personal memory of how things were before, and no immunity to the seductions of digital life. What we are seeing and bringing on ourselves resembles a neurological catastrophe on a gigantic scale. Nonetheless, I dare to hope that despite everything, human life and its richness of cultures will survive, even on a ravaged earth. While some see art as a bulwark of our culture, our collective memory, I see science, with its depth of thought, its palpable achievements and potentials, as equally important. And science, good science, is flourishing as never before, moving cautiously and slowly, its insights checked by continual self-testing and experimentation. Though I revere good writing and art and music, it seems to me that only science, aided by human decency, common sense, far-sightedness, and concern for the unfortunate and the poor, offers the world any hope in its present morass. This idea is explicit in Pope Francis's encyclical, and may be practiced not only with vast centralized technologies, but by workers, artisans, and farmers in the villages of the world. Between us, we can surely pull the world through its present crises and lead the way to a happier time ahead. As I face my own impending departure from the world, I have to believe in this, that mankind and our planet will survive, that life will continue, and that this will not be our final hour.
That was our member, Max Zenner. Max, thank you so much. Now, if you will join me on page 79 for There's a Place.
There's a place with answers we are seeking. There's a place to find our light of hope. Where's the strength to realize our vision? יש מקום בתוכנו, יש מקום בתוכנו. Look within yourself, you'll find it there. There's a place with wisdom that can guide us. There's a place where we know what's right or wrong. Where's the path to peace that we all long for? יש מקום בתוכנו, יש מקום בתוכנו. Look within yourself, you'll find it there.
Throughout the high holidays, our focus is on forgiveness, repair, and renewal. On Rosh Hashanah, we begin the process of self-reflection. By tradition, some Jews enact the Tashlich ritual by throwing their sins into the sea or a river and letting them float away. Tomorrow on Yom Kippur, we will recite together, collectively, a list of failings. As a community, we will forgive others and ask their forgiveness. Tonight, at Kol Nidre, let us contemplate our own personal and private misdeeds. Let us forgive ourselves for having failed our own standards. Let us treat ourselves as we would friends by putting our failures behind us and starting anew, trying to do better this time. Think of acts you have done during this past year that you wish you could undo. Regrets, embarrassments, mistakes you are still carrying in your heart. These memories may bring you shame, disappointment, even anger with yourself. Think of ways you acted with others that you wish you could take back. Think of ways you acted with yourself that you wish you could repair. Imagine writing down these regrets on a piece of paper, and imagine writing down the emotions they stirred up in you. Now think of just one way you might have acted differently. Perhaps you might have thought twice before reacting, or held back words you wish you hadn't said, or made the right choice instead of the wrong one impulsively out of habit. And as you think about how to do things differently next time, imagine the writing on the paper fading away, getting dimmer, and finally vanishing before your eyes. Imagine your regrets lifting from your heart, giving you a new clean slate to start the year. Forgiveness starts one step at a time, one day at a time, one breath at a time. And we say to ourselves, I acknowledge my misdeeds. I admit my wrongdoing. I strive to forgive myself my imperfections. I strive to do better and to improve my ways. For in the end, it is always up to me how I will write the pages of the book of my heart for the year ahead. As Jews, when we forget our identity, we diminish ourselves and our families.
Let us proclaim anew our ties to our people and our history.
When we neglect the lessons of our heritage, we lose sight of time-honored truths.
Let us proclaim anew an eagerness to learn from the experiences of our past.
When we forget our heroes and martyrs, we deny the strength and inspiration of human bravery.
Let us proclaim anew the courage of our ancestors.
As humans, when we succumb to temptation, we allow our higher selves to be subverted by negative impulses.
Let us proclaim anew our belief in self-improvement and self-control.
When we suppress our optimism with cynicism, we turn hope into despair.
Let us proclaim anew our belief in humanity.
When we shirk our responsibility to make a difference, we discredit our ability to effect change.
Let us proclaim anew our belief in human potential.
אם אין אני לי מילי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו אימתי, אימתי, ואם לא עכשיו אימתי, ואם לא עכשיו אימתי, ואם לא עכשיו Matai, hey Matai. Who will be my befriender if I'm not my own defender? But if I'm for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, oh tell me when. This day will not come again. This day will not come again. Time goes by. Who will tend my neighbor's needs? Who will sow tomorrow's seeds? Who will answer for my deeds? If not I, and if not now, oh tell me when. This day will not come again. This day will not come again. Time goes by. Im eina nili mili, ukshani le'atzmi mani, ve'im lo akshav matai, matai, ve'im lo akshav matai, ve'im lo akshav matai, ve'im lo akshav matai, matai, matai.
Personal responsibility. We might be compared to a flame in our fragility. A human being is a minute entity in the vast universe. Our physical power is slight, yet a single human act of kindness or love illuminates like the candle's flame. One person has the potential to push back the darkness, to bring clarity where none has existed. We change the world through the actions of individuals. I bear responsibility as a Jew and as a humanist to do my part to make the world as I wish it to be. Reflection is the only step in the process of change. I must ask myself, what can I do? What actions I can take to make this world a better world for all humankind?
Yom Kippur is a day of memory.
We remember those who taught us to laugh and cry.
We remember those who held us and whom we held.
We remember those who loved us and whom we loved.
There are stars whose radiance is visible on earth, though they have long been extinct.
There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, though they are no longer among the living.
In their memory, we pledge
to cherish the teachings they bequeathed to us,
to honor their highest ideals,
to live our lives to their fullest.
We will now have a moment for silent meditation.
זכר צדיקים לברכה.
Hey, thank you, everyone. That's the conclusion of our service. Just a few announcements. Tomorrow, we start services at 10:30 a.m. And this is a full month. We have a lot of events coming up. I encourage you to check the calendar. We start to have in-person Shabbats again at the New York Film Academy on October 1st, I believe? October 1st. We also have virtual events at the same time. We're doing, like many places do, hybrid scheduling, and we encourage you to look at and attend. Thank you very much. Shana Tova.